The Raiders are in search of their fifth head coach since 2020. I think they're now paying three coaches to not coach the Raiders. So the Raiders are tied with the Texans and Panthers for most head coaches over that period. And now, with this opening, and I know Deion says he wants to stay at Colorado. He's got a real good recruiting class. But I've said all along, if he could go to the Raiders and he knew that Shador was going there and then he could draft his son, Shiloh, as well, I wonder if that's something that Tom Brady is considering or would consider. He is Greg McElroy, ESPN college football analyst. He'll be on the call, ABC, ESPN tonight. It's Penn State, Notre Dame. How about we start there? Deion in the NFL or staying at Colorado?
Well, are you suggesting which way I would, if I were giving Deion some type of advice, which way would I go? I would probably stay at Colorado. I think you can write your ticket there, man. He's become must-see television. The Alamo Bowl, a game that he lost by 20, 30 points, was the highest rated game outside of the college football playoff in the bowl season. He's appointment television for many, and I think now with the support that they're getting from an NIL standpoint, Dan, I think it's easier to win on a consistent level in college. I think in the NFL, you can be the greatest thing in the world and then fired the next year.
Yeah.
College, you got a little bit more runway if you can have a positive impact on the kids.
All right, the point spread tonight is Notre Dame by 1.5. Let's say the game comes down to that kind of point spread. Paint the picture for the audience of you being the analyst tonight of how you think that would play out in the final seconds.
Well, it would be phenomenal. Sean McDonough. Something tells me we would have a voice crack and we would have a lot of energy and we would have one heck of a finish. As long as a punter doesn't drop it and allow Jalen Watts-Jackson to return one to the house. That could elicit some stronger reaction. That would be 2 or 3 voice cracks potentially. But Dan, I don't know about you. You've been a college football fan for a long time, and you've supported and helped promote our sport, and we're very grateful to you for that. But I think the college football playoff, while we haven't had the most compelling matchups from a competitive standpoint, it's been captivating television. And I think if we could just get one that would go the distance. You look at the game between Arizona State and Texas, a game that went to overtime, multiple overtimes. That game had 17.3 million viewers at noon or 1 o'clock Eastern time on New Year's Day. A window that had not performed well in the past gets an all-time high because of how compelling that game was. And it was between two programs, one blue blood and one that's kind of an upstart in Arizona State. That would be magnificent. But I think if Notre Dame and Penn State, 2 of the most storied programs, 2 of the top programs in the history of college football from a win standpoint, 2 in the top 7, if it comes down to the wire like that, it'd be pretty remarkable. And it's probably going to be a defensive slugfest. It's going to feel like a pitcher's duel. It's going to feel like, Verlander on the mound against Kershaw 10 years ago. And whoever can somehow find a CNI single's got a chance to win the game. It's going to be pretty remarkable.
Best player on the field tonight will be?
When Notre Dame's on offense, the best player on the field tonight could actually be 2 players on either side, depending on their health. Abdul Carter, in all likelihood, will play for Penn State, the defensive end, pass rusher. Kuiper's got him as the number 2 overall player behind Travis Hunter. Super dynamic player. But they move him around too. That's what's fun. I think he's not one of those guys that's just stationary end of the line of scrimmage player. Like, he can be over the center, he can be over the guard, he can blitz off the second level. Like, he's a very versatile piece that you can move around. He is at less than 100% because of a shoulder injury that he suffered against Boise State, played just 17 snaps in that game. So we'll be monitoring his availability as a game-time decision. Then on the other side is Jeremiah Love, who has a right knee injury, the running back for Notre Dame. He hasn't really been all that effective. He hurt his knee against USC in the final week of the regular season and has like 13 touches in the 2 playoff games since. The problem is that one of those 13 touches is a 98-yard touchdown run. So he's still got great top-end speed, but those are the 2 players that I think are probably the most captivating television for tonight's game.
Handicap tomorrow night's game, Ohio State, Texas.
Everybody's on Ohio State, aren't they?
Yeah.
I feel like you're getting Texas on sale from a handicapping perspective. Texas on the heels of a 2 overtime win as a double-digit favorite, 2 touchdown favorite against Arizona State. Oh, Texas got flaws. Quinn Ewers is flawed.
Are you going to
The
buy them?
defense got problems.
It sounds like you would buy Texas a home
It just
game.
it feel well. Is Ohio State ever on the road? I guess is the other question that I'm starting to realize when it comes to neutral sites, man. Ohio State's going to be there, and they're going to be loud, and they're going to make their presence felt. I do think though that Texas is they're a team that can absolutely match up against. I think they match up really well. I'm not saying they'll win the game. I actually think Ohio State will win the game. But if you're going to tell me I can get nearly 7, if I can get 6, 6.5, 5.5, I kind of lean Longhorns. I look at where they're built and their strength. They're very similar to Michigan with what they have along the defensive front. And while I think Oregon's a good football team, I don't think Oregon is as equipped. I know they beat Ohio State earlier in the season. I also acknowledge, though, that version of Ohio State very different than the Ohio State that they saw just this past weekend at the Rose Bowl. Ohio State at that time in that game lost their left tackle. Will Howard was not yet as comfortable as he is right now. Their receiver, Jeremiah Smith, in that game was a good player, but not a take over the game. This is the best player in college football type of player at that point. So Ohio State's very different. So they beat Oregon badly because Oregon took the same plan that they used the first time around, and they don't match up as well. Texas will kind of keep things in front, and their defensive line can win the game. That's Texas's strength, and that's where Ohio State lost the game against Michigan. So I do think that Texas matches up better than anyone else up to this point in the postseason against Ohio State.
Greg McElroy, ESPN college football analyst. He'll be on the call. It's on ABC and ESPN. Sean McDonough will be there, Molly McGrath, Katie George, and that starts at 7:30 Eastern. Also part of Omaha Productions' Always College Football podcast, co-host of Mac and Cube in the Morning on WJOX in Birmingham. How often do coaches get out-coached?
Oh, a lot.
Because I'll go back to what Notre Dame did against Kirby Smart, what Marcus Freeman did when they swapped out and then they were going to punt, they were not. Then you get offside. I mean, that's one moment, but to me, that helped change the game. So I don't know, like you played for Nick Saban, but the number of times, like Bill Belichick, how many times will he out-coach somebody in the college in college games?
You know what's funny is and I know that this is like the most obvious coach speak thing ever, so apologize in advance, but more games are lost than won. You know what I'm saying? Like, we'll go back to the game in the Sugar Bowl with Notre Dame against Georgia. 2 moments stand out in the game. Okay, one was at the end of the half. They have a backup quarterback in the game. Notre Dame is thinking, hey, they're going to run the ball, take it to half. The game's going to be 6-3. Notre Dame's got a slight lead, but for the most part, it's a low-scoring game, and it's lacked a lot of offense. Well, they put their run defense personnel in the game. R.J. Oben is a guy that at that moment had 0 sacks on the season. Well, what does he do? He goes right around the left tackle, strip sack, fumble recovery, Notre Dame on the next offensive snap, touchdown. Now it's a game that feels like it's blown open at 13-3. Yeah. That was one moment in the game, and that was Kirby being probably a little bit too aggressive there at the end of half. Hindsight's 2020. Like, do you really expect your left tackle to get killed by a run-stopping defensive end? Probably not. All right, so that was one moment. The other moment was, like you referenced, late in the game, Marcus Freeman opts to run his punt team on 4th and 1, and then all of a sudden run his punt team off, put his offense on, which allows Kirby's team and defense to substitute, but they're thinking about getting lined up. The last thing they're thinking about in that scenario is the snap count. It was chaotic on the sideline. It was chaotic near the line of scrimmage. Their best player, a guy in Jalen Walker, who's going to be a 3 or 4-time All-Pro in his career, leans just ever so slightly in the neutral zone, free play, first down. Next thing you know, 9 plays later and 6 minutes off the clock, they've stolen the possession. So I think great coaches know how to just tweak and create that slight edge to steal a possession, whether it's a timely onside kick, a fake punt, a surprise onside kick, thing going for it on 4th down, maybe backed up and getting it somehow. Great coaches know at that perfect time when to pull that card and play it. Marcus did it once, and Kirby made a mistake at the end of half, and that's why the game ended up the way it ended up.
How often have you had to, or did you have to consciously say to Greg McElroy, former Alabama quarterback, don't be SEC friendly? Because you're going to get criticized no matter what, because
Right.
we're going to read into what you say and how you say it. But I'm asking you, understanding that, have you had to remind yourself, be as fair as possible, even though subconsciously it might still be in your DNA?
I don't even know, and I think it's a great question. I think it's all from a matter of perspective. Like, if you want to know who I am biased towards, it's great teams. You know what I mean? Like I kind of just follow. I like to watch the teams that execute at a really high level. Like, I really, really, whether it was Michigan last year or whether it was TCU 2 years ago or whatever the teams it may be, I've always loved Utah. Like, I just love how they, never maybe as far as getting off the bus, maybe not the best team, but even dating back to when Urban Meyer was there in the early 2000s, it's long been a team I've just had a tremendous amount of admiration for. So I've kind of found myself navigating towards the teams that play really high level football. As far as the SEC stuff, I do have more familiarity with the league. Let's be real. I called 5 Georgia games this year. I called 4 Kentucky games. I called 4 Ole Miss games. I called a couple of Tennessee games, a couple Bama games. Like, you just have maybe a deeper understanding of the depths of the roster. But there's never really a point. If you do your work professionally, I could care less what patch they have on their jersey. I simply see numbers, names, coaches, records, statistics, and tendencies. What conference they align with is not one that I usually pay a lot of attention to. And I know people ask me all the time, how do you call Bama games and not allow your fandom to come out? I'm like, pretty easily, because when I was in school, I was probably harder on Alabama as a player than I could ever be in this line of work. So I think if you look at it through not a critiquing lens, but a lens in which you're trying to offer constructive criticism and point out observations, then the conference affiliation should have no impact on how you call the game.
But college football is about brands. Everybody was screaming for Alabama to be in the playoffs, and I go, no, they don't deserve to be in the playoffs.
I think it's about brands to an extent. I do think there is this perception that the big brands are going to get preferential treatment. I don't know if that's,
well, they do bring eyeballs. They do bring, like,
sure.
Notre Dame brings eyeballs.
Absolutely.
People are going to watch.
Absolutely.
And I think because of Alabama, they're like, well, God, do we want Boise State or Arizona State in there? We want Alabama in there. And we saw Alabama against Michigan in the bowl game. They just weren't a great team, a good team this year. And I think that's a problem for college football. We get top heavy with Georgia, Ohio State. Clemson used to be in there. It's like the same 6 or 7 schools every year that we get programmed to think, oh, those are the best teams in the country. Arizona State was awesome. I mean, that was so much fun. And Boise State did what Boise State was supposed to do. Indiana did what they were supposed to do. Now, do I think Indiana deserved to be in there? No, from a talent perspective, or who they played, but they played who's on their schedule. So until we come up with a better format with this, Greg, or scenarios that make it fairer, I don't want us to fall back on, well, I don't know, just put Alabama in. Put Clemson in.
Yeah.
I don't like that. I worry about that.
When in doubt, give the teams with more stars, meaning like star ratings, the recruiting ratings. Like, when in doubt, give them the benefit of the doubt. I don't think that's the proper way to go about it, because would Alabama potentially have been more competitive in a playoff setting? I have no idea. And I that's why I can't sit here and pound the drum. Oh, clearly we need to reevaluate, how we're seeding teams or how we're putting teams in and who should get in and who shouldn't. Now, I think there are things we can do to adjust our criteria by incentivizing improved and strengthened non-conference schedules. I would like to see that because that benefits all of us. If we see stronger non-conference games, that's going to only create more intrigue and maybe add a little more context to the conference supremacy argument. I'd like to see it. We see it in basketball. If you play a murderer's row schedule in the non-conference, then your likelihood of having a high RPI come tournament time is really high. And if you're 19 and 15 from Syracuse, doesn't really matter because you make the tournament. Next thing you know, in a play-in game, you're 11 seed, you're playing the Final Four. So we've seen it in the past. I mean, it's definitely possible. I'd like to see stronger non-conference because right now in bloated conferences, you can't. Not all SEC schedules are created equal. Yeah. Not all Big Ten schedules are created equal. So I think non-conference play is where we need to focus. And if we can incentivize teams that go out of their conference and play top-tier competition, that should be rewarded regardless of the outcome in some cases. Now, they get blown out? No, absolutely not. Like, that's a data point that needs to be considered. But it also, if it's close, and if it was on the road and you tried to go play a top-tier team and lost, that should be rewarded as opposed to playing an FCS team and winning by 35. You know what I'm saying, Dan?
I think it should come down to Vegas should be relied on to rank the teams, your top 12 teams. It should be Vegas. Vegas has no opinion, no bias. They are looking at what is the best matchups. And I think Vegas would make more sense. I don't want these automatic berths. I don't want any of that. It should be, here's the 12 best teams. I saw you cringing.
Yes, to an extent, yes, because if we did that, then USC, from a power rating standpoint at the season's end at 7-5, is in the mix. If we went strictly off Vegas, now Vegas plays a little bit on psychology too. I mean, why do you think now power ratings are a factor, but there's also, which team is playing better at the moment, which team is going to garner more public interest, which team is, if I set the line, maybe shaded the line, maybe a point and a half higher, is that going to generate more buzz and to create balance on either side of the line? I just think Vegas has different incentives. While I understand and appreciate the thought process of that, then at that point, why do we play the game? Let's just have a 64-team tournament and let's just see how things go.
That'll be for another day. That'll be for another day.
Rank them all the way and let's go. I don't think it's broken. The one thing I would adjust is I think that Big Ten and SEC conference champions should be rewarded with a home playoff game. And however we figure out the bowl system after the fact, I think we'll probably get rid of byes because it's proven, at least in this tournament, that the bye does not benefit you. Yeah. And how can we get the conference champions to get home games? That needs to be examined as well.
All right, have fun tonight, okay?
I appreciate you, friend.
Right. And be nice to both sides, okay?
Always.
Okay. Greg McElroy. He'll be on the call with Sean McDonough tonight. Festivities start at ABC and ESPN at 7:30 Eastern.